Margy, Verba, welcome back to the Movement Detectively podcast. I thought you'd be the perfect person to have on for a bit of biomechanical Q&A nerdery.
All right. You know I
So,
love it. So,
so this is a question that I got from someone who emailed in recently, and I resonated a lot with this question, and I realized in the moment it was a bit too big to email back succinctly.
mhm.
And I thought also, oh, this is right up Margy's alley. So let's have Margy chime in. 'Cause I know this is the kind of thing that you probably think about or you would enjoy thinking about. So here's the question that I got, and we'll just say this is from a person named Sue, not their real name. Hello, Monica. I have a quick question, if you have time to answer. Something I can't figure out when I do my normal brisk walk, example, walking to work, everything feels good. But when I do a slow saunter, for example, strolling in the park with my girlfriend, my lumbar spine starts to ache. I appreciate that might be difficult to know without a visual of me walking, but do you have any insight on how the mechanics of a slow stroll might be impacting my lower back? Thank you very much. So I thought that's a really interesting question, and I've also had that experience of walking slowly. Like for me, what really stands out is going to the museum with my parents one day, and at the time I wasn't really into museums, so that could be a whole part of why my back hurt. But also, just that slow walking, I was like, oh my God, my back. By the end of the day, I was so sore in my lumbar spine. So, Margie, any thoughts on this?
Well, yes. Like you said, first of all, to answer that individual, of course, I would have to see her walking at different speeds. But as a more general answer as to why perhaps somebody's back might hurt with a slow saunter when it doesn't at a faster speed, the first thing that comes to my mind is the factor of momentum, which I think for whatever reason, I like to lurk on social media and look at different people who are talking about gait. And I rarely actually hear people talk about momentum. They tend to talk about muscles and what muscles move you forward in space. And momentum, okay, just to be clear, I have had to learn some physics for the kind of work that we do, but I did not take physics in high school or college because I probably would have flunked. Momentum is mass times speed. So speed is a factor in momentum. And if we harness momentum in walking, then our muscles don't need to do as much work. So just by slowing down, you lose some momentum. So that's kind of the first thing that came to my mind. Um, I'm going to talk to you also in context. Both you and I are anatomy and motion instructors, and I love the way Gary talks about momentum. Gary Ward, the founder, for those who don't know, the founder of Anatomy and Motion, and the role of muscles, that our muscles in gait, in walking, will first contract to decelerate motion. So they're contracting eccentrically. And then you have this isometric moment where between contracting eccentrically to decelerate our forward motion. And then you have this concentric contraction, and that is just to change direction. So to be specific, let's say you have leg swing. And so the muscles that decelerate the foot as it lands on the ground or strikes the ground after swing phase, that's your eccentric phase. And then you have, you load the posterior chain, and you have then a concentric contraction to actually change direction so that the leg that was swinging forward is now going to move behind you. And I'm going to use anatomical terminology because I'm going to assume that most people listening to this will know. So the leg that was flexing then starts to extend, and what changes the direction, you do need a concentric contraction to change direction from flexing to extending. And that's where, but then a lot of systems that talk about gait, or a lot of perspectives on gait, will then talk about, and then we have this concentric contraction to extend the leg. And I think they're kind of missing the boat, that the concentric contraction just changes direction and then momentum takes over. So the role of momentum really saves your muscles from doing a lot of work, and speed is a factor. It's mass times velocity. So speed is a factor in momentum. So you slow down, you lose momentum. And that's just one thing. That many things came to my mind, but that was the primary one. But the way I like to illustrate this eccentric, isometric, concentric, and then momentum takes over is, I think that most people have had the experience of pushing a child in a swing. So you push the swing, and then the swing comes back toward you, and you don't just bluntly stop the swing. You decelerate the swing. Otherwise, you'd probably injure yourself, and it'd be quite jarring for the child.
The child, I was gonna say.
Yeah, right, right. So you decelerate the swing, and that's your eccentric contraction. And then you have this isometric moment before you push the swing, but you don't take the swing and run with it forward. You push it, and then you let momentum take over.
Oh yeah, like imagine how much of a workout that would be as the swing pusher.
Exactly.
It'd be so much more
Right,
energy.
right. So I think that's part of it. And then, if you read the literature on gait, people have sort of a natural speed where things work most efficiently. And I forget what it is, but it's, probably different articles would give you different numbers, but I think it was something around 3 miles per hour.
Mm.
No, yeah, 3 miles per hour is sort of an average speed where things, we come from an anatomy and motion background, and we talk about the flow motion model. And when everything is working optimally, there's flow in your movement, and as you move forward in space and you locomote. So there is some kind of optimal speed for everyone where they have that flow motion. So imagine if you're walking at a slower speed, it's inefficient.
Mm.
And, that might actually be the exact same conversation as momentum. And then also you have, because a footstep would then take longer than your quote unquote ideal or natural speed, perhaps there's more excursion in the spine, and in the pelvis, in the sagittal, or in maybe all planes. There's just more time for the spine to move, and maybe that alone could be overloading it. So those are the thoughts
Mm.
that came to my mind. I do have other thoughts too, but I want to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, no, for me, the momentum piece was what immediately came to mind. And what you said reminded me of in the flow motion model. What I understand is that this model of gait is based on a quote unquote normal walking pace, which would be like our question asker Sue is describing their normal brisk pace. That would be what we're basing the flow motion model on, and that's very different for every individual. It's quite
Mm-hmm.
subjective, so we can't really say what is the standard pace for someone to go at, but it'll be faster or slower depending on probably many factors. Your limb length, your skeletal structure, your social conditioning, your psychology. But anyway, it reminds me of a time I was working with Helen Hall in the UK in her studio, and she has that 3D motion capture technology set up to a treadmill. And she got me on the treadmill and she said, try to find the walking pace that is your most natural. So it has to feel like how you would feel if you just went walking down the street. And it was a very touchy-feely, like, does it feel like we need to go a little bit faster, a little bit slower? Tell me when you get to your most natural, because that's the gait that I want to record and assess. And granted, it's on a treadmill, so it might be a little bit different than walking on the ground. But her explanation for me was, if it is the pace that feels normal for you, and if we can calibrate that correctly, then it shouldn't be that much different on a treadmill than it is on a flat ground because
Okay,
there won't be that
interesting.
impact of the treadmill pulling you, like if you're running on
Mhm.
a treadmill. So the premise of the flow motion model at one's normal speed of gait, it should be effortless and free from discomfort if all the joints are able to access both ends of their movement spectrum in all three planes in a more or less symmetrical way on the right and left sides of the body. And you already mentioned the joints act, muscles react part of it. So for me, the momentum piece comes in. If you're walking at a normal pace, then you should have access to momentum as you described it. But it also makes me think of some individual factors of if the joints need to act and the muscles to react appropriately for momentum to operate at play for us and reduce the amount of energy expenditure by concentrically contracting your way through gait, then we need to know if this person has any specific restrictions that might be impacting them at that slower pace where there's less momentum and they're more likely to maybe, like you said, the spine going into a further excursion of extension. If they have limitations that makes it so that that spine extension is what's propelling them forward because perhaps they can't access something else that
Mhm.
should be extending at that moment in time, like hip extension
Mhm.
or maybe knee flexion or maybe even upper thoracic farther up extension. So they're extending through one spot in their lumbar spine. And ask me how I know what that feels like. So that could be the case as well. I mean, something that people could stand up and try right now is walk at a slow pace. And I think most people, I don't know if this is a blanket statement, but most people might feel that they end up propelling forward through their lumbars, like push with the lumbars, push with the lumbars, like falling into that part of their back versus actually being able to access a hip extension. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, I stood up and played with it, and I used an image. So I don't know because what I found myself doing, there is a model, an image. I don't know what to call it. Are you familiar with the reverse pendulum concept? Where, so
No.
a pendulum. Okay, so, and for I will say that some gait gurus out there, and I think Gary might actually be in this category. I think I did bring it up to him once, and the face he made makes me think he might be in the category, but he's not alone. He's not the only one. For whatever reason, it's sometimes unpopular. Like people, oh no, I don't that they'll explain in the physics why they don't like it, or there'll be some reason they don't like this reverse pendulum image or model of gait. But I actually love playing with it. I like the results that I get in my body. So if you think
Okay.
about a pendulum, you have a weight hanging on a string or something like that. And then in a frictionless environment, it'll perpetually, once it's in motion, it will perpetually swing back and forth. And it's, and again, physics converting kinetic energy into potential energy and potential, and then back into kinetic energy. But you can picture a pendulum is just swinging. So again, you wouldn't need muscles once the pendulum was going. You just, okay. So the reverse pendulum concept is you can think of your foot as whatever the object that the string is would be hanging from, but instead it's upside down, and the weight that would normally be hanging from the string is your pelvis. And I actually recommend for everybody, just it's so much easier to imagine if you stand up and do it. In fact, I'm going to stand up because I don't even know that I can describe it unless I'm doing it
Okay, I'm gonna
myself.
stand up too.
But
Just try to
and
stay
this
close to
actually
the
works.
microphone.
Okay, but this actually works best at a slower, for me, in my body, at a slower speed. So let's all just start
Margie,
with
can you come closer to your microphone so we
okay,
can
yeah.
hear
So
you?
we'll start with oh yeah, I'm not mic'd. I should have mic'd. But anyway, let's just start with the right leg back. And so if you just kind of allow your pelvis, imagine that it's a reverse pendulum. So just allow your pelvis to just move forward in space, and then you catch with the other foot. And you can kind of go back and forth to get the feeling. Like there's not a lot of muscle involved in just moving my pelvis back and forth. And then you add, the next step. So it's really key. Again, you're harnessing the momentum of your pelvis moving forward. But I find that this reverse pendulum image or model for me at a slower speed really allows me to harness momentum. Whereas if I'm walking at my more natural speed, yes, there is full body momentum, but what I really experience is the momentum of my arm swinging and my legs swinging. It's a very different experience of momentum. And so when I slowed down, I just found playing with what worked for me, for it to not like feel compression in my spine or anything negative, to turn it into a positive experience at a slow saunter.
Mm.
If I just kind of focused on that reverse pendulum, and again, you're sort of, floating through space almost effortlessly, but
Mm.
at a slower than normal speed. I don't know, could you find it in your body at all? The sensation of a reverse pendulum? I don't know if you were able to stand up with
Yeah, I'll have to play
balance
with
and
that a
sort.
little
Okay,
bit more. To be honest, I feel pretty crusty right now because I've just been sitting
okay,
on a foam roller for the
okay.
past 2 hours doing another interview before you. So I'm
Oh,
like,
okay,
oh,
okay,
I need to
okay.
play with this reverse pendulum right
Right.
now. But what
So I
about
recommend kind of first just kind of going back and forth instead of turning it into a gait cycle, but just,
yeah.
allow the reverse pendulum to move back and forth. And you
Mm.
can even imagine like you're flipped upside down and you're hanging, but get that sense of the pelvis just swinging
Mm.
on a leg that's
It's a great
attached to the floor.
image.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not popular. Maybe because in terms of physics, it doesn't really match. I don't know, but I love playing with that at a slower speed. And
Mm.
times in my life where I have had injuries or tweaks, it's really helped me find a flowing sense of gait.
Hmm. Well, I mean, if it works, it
Yeah,
works. It doesn't matter if it aligns with physics.
right,
At the end of the
exactly.
day, if it gives you
Exactly.
a
Yeah,
benefit, it's good.
yeah.
But
I'm
what
not
about
totally convinced.
the,
Yeah.
if there's you mentioned something really important that we need that momentum, pendulum motion to be able to take place, but someone might have something that happened with their body, like an injury previously or a restriction somewhere that's making it impossible for them to access that flowing movement. And it could be even something like their right shoulder was dislocated in their
Yeah.
past and that arm doesn't swing back. And now they're having to find other ways of moving forward through space. So, what might be some of the things that you would want to ask this person about to understand if they have something that's going on restriction wise that might be making this a an issue for them?
I mean, just what you just said, what their restrictions are, but I'm not sure I
Yeah.
would ask them. I would observe, that I would observe them
Yeah.
because this is again probably going to be really controversial. I am interested for sure in what my clients feel, but I will often find, some clients are much more in tune with, they're used to sensing their body and sensing their body position. But for example, Gary, I hope you're not listening, but I rarely ask my clients about, I used to ask, but I don't anymore, I'm just using this as an example, foot pressures, because I found most of the time what they were experiencing did not match at all where their foot pressures actually were. And if I had all the time in the world, I'd be very interested in what they felt. But it's like, we don't have all the time in the world. So I'm going to assess what their foot pressures actually are. So I don't tend to ask people. I mean, yes, if we're doing assessments of individual joint motions, pelvic hike and drop, I might say, which felt easier to you? I might be interested in that. But um, I mostly just go by what I observe. Like
Mm,
I can clearly see that the right hikes more than the left. So I don't tend to ask that much.
mm.
I observe. If something causes pain or just feels really sticky, yes, I mean, I don't mean it that black and white, but I base my analysis, um, my trial and error path of what I'm going, the path that I'm going to go down with the clients. Well, let's try this, put some change into the system and see what comes out the other end. I
Mm.
base it much more on my observations
Yeah.
than what they tell me, because I don't have the time always to have that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, understanding if they have an injury history that would predispose them to lower back discomfort, that would be
Yeah,
important to know about. But I think what you said about observation, that probably, when it comes down to it, would be the best thing to do for this person is to get a sense of what's their static postural setup and then what's their dynamic movement potential, in particular at their pelvis and hips and spine, to see what's
absolutely.
happening there. And if we could see a
Absolutely.
video of what's happening when they're walking slowly versus walking quickly, we might see that when they're walking at their normal pace, they might have, let's just say, for example, so blanketing something very common onto this person. Maybe they have a at rest standing in a anterior pelvic tilt and a lumbar spine that's quite extended, and that's their static setup. And then when they're walking at their normal pace, maybe we see from a side view, we see that their hips aren't really extending with each footstep, but their lumbar spine is always extended and they're never quite able to posteriorly tilt their pelvis and get out of that anterior pelvic tilt. Hence, their hips aren't extending. But they don't feel symptomatic because, as you mentioned before, momentum. There's enough momentum to make it more effortless, and there's not an amount of maybe they don't get into too much compression in their lumbar spine because they're moving and their legs are swinging enough that the leg swinging forward is putting in a bit of a posterior tilt and there's movement in the spine. It's not causing them a problem. But then if you watch them walk slower, then we might not have the momentum and we might notice that there's actually there's no opportunity now for the lumbar spine to move into less of an extension with the legs swinging forward as quickly. That leg swing is going to be slowed down quite a bit, so it won't be pulling their pelvis into enough of a posterior tilt to even get them out of their exaggerated extension.
Hmm.
So to me, that's something that would come to mind is that we want to know that about them statically and then
Yeah,
see what's happening in motion. Can they actually posterior tilt their pelvis and not need momentum to do it? Because I think anyone could just swing their leg and it would drag their pelvis into a posterior tilt. And that
hmm,
leg
hmm,
swing is momentum. We need that
yeah,
momentum to have
yeah,
that happen effortlessly. But can you stand there and without momentum and effortlessly find a posterior tilt of the pelvis that will extend your hips and flex your lumbar spine, decompressing it? If that's a no, then probably you will notice it affects how you're
yeah.
walking.
And yes, I agree. And what this conversation has also highlighted for me, that just this last bit that you just said, is I think one of the reasons that I enjoy playing with the reverse pendulum concept is that it really does, in a way, disassociate the pelvis from the hip in that moment where the pelvis is moving forward in space and the hip is extending.
Mhm.
And I think it really facilitates finding hip extension, and not relying on lumbar extension to get the leg behind,
Mm,
but it facilitates hip extension without the hip extensors
mm,
having to move you forward in space. The hip extensors have done their job when you go from flexing to extending, and then they shouldn't have to move you forward. I've heard some people use the image of hip extension as like paddling, like paddling a canoe, that you need that to move you forward. And I think that's completely discounting the role of momentum, that you
Mm,
don't need that hip extensor to move your pelvis forward in space once you've generated the momentum by just changing direction with your hip
mm.
extensors. But I guess um, I think that's why I have such a great experience of the reverse pendulum at a slower speed, is that it does allow me to really disassociate the hip and find hip extension
Yeah.
effortlessly.
Yeah. So I guess something practical for people if they also relate to this question, how do we create an environment in our bodies that momentum can happen?
Well,
Take an anatomy and motion course. No, just
yeah.
kidding.
Well, I mean, really, and let me say something about being able to walk at different speeds. I am spending over a month this summer with my 92-year-old mother, and being able to slow down to her pace is a very useful skill, because I
Mm.
remember when my dad started shuffling. He's now deceased, but when they were, when he was still alive and they did stuff together and he started shuffling, she would just say, "I can't walk that slow. I just can't walk with your father anymore." And I find, now I don't want to remind her, "Mom, I'm slowing down for you," but it's a useful skill if you have any elderly people in your life, that and you want to
Mm.
walk with them. So it's coming in handy right now.
It's a good
But
point.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, no, you kind of said it tongue in cheek, take an anatomy and motion course, but it's if restore all, what are we about in anatomy and motion, but is restoring all the joint motions required in a single footstep, and all the combined joint motions, how they integrate with each other
Mm.
and interact with each other. Um, I think there's a reason you and I are both anatomy and motion
Mhm.
instructors. I mean, I have not yet. If you go to my website and you look at, I do have a bio on there, I think, where it lists all the continuing ed that I've done, and nothing that I've ever studied has been, I mean, I didn't mean to turn this into an ad for anatomy and motion, but we are anatomy and motion instructors for a reason, and nothing I've ever done has been as effective for liberating joint motion, basically,
Mm.
and distribution of the load across many joints and all planes of motion.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that
So in the
is, I
spine
think that's how it works.
specifically,
Yeah,
that's a huge thing is we have many segments of the spine and probably most of us don't evenly spread the movement throughout all of those segments
yeah,
of the spine, but it goes
right,
to the lowest common denominators, the things that are low-hanging fruit, easy to move because
right,
of past
exactly.
injuries, perhaps, or learned movement patterns or postural habits. So, as you said, yes, it's about liberating all the joint motions that should happen in a footstep and then making sure the right ratios exist between all of those. So, it's not just the lumbar spine extending, but the whole of the
Exactly.
spine that
Yeah.
can extend to the degree that it needs to. And
And it's not just distributing the load across segments or joints, multiple joints, but it's also distributing the load across planes, multiple planes,
mm,
because, in general, if somebody is restricted in one plane of motion, they're going to get excessive motion in some other plane of motion.
yeah, and not
They're
just
gonna-
planes of motion, but across different parts of the body. We always
Yeah,
talk about these
yeah,
exchanges. So
right.
maybe something to look into is how your feet are moving, and what if there's tons and tons of pronation available in the feet and dorsiflexion available in the ankles, and then not a lot of movement whatsoever in the hips.
Hmm.
We need to know if there's any exchanges between how much is one body part doing versus another at a particular moment in
Yep.
time and redistribute those maybe a little bit less from the feet so that the hips can do a little bit more.
Hmm.
I also have on a less mechanical note as a final thought, and this is, I don't know, not scientific whatsoever, but what if there's a psychological component here? You know what I said earlier about being at the museum with my parents?
Yeah.
What if there really is a thing like that? You know, the act of walking briskly might emulate some kind of walking towards a goal, you know, moving quickly towards a goal might be a very positive experience in the body, an embodied feeling of I am doing something
Yeah.
productive and I feel good about that, versus time spent sauntering in the park, in their words, as nourishing as that sounds. What if there's a part of them that thinks they're wasting time and
Yeah.
feels bad about themselves for wasting time? And maybe that could represent itself as a feeling of discomfort in their body. I don't know. That's a
No, of
speculation.
course, of course, I mean, absolutely, that's a possibility that, especially in our culture where moving slowly is, quote, I'm doing air quotes, a waste of time, can be a waste of time.
Mm. But
So,
it's
you know,
not,
that's
because
the
you're
idea.
spending time with your mom and you're spending quality
Exactly.
time walking slowly with your mom.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you, Margie, on that amazing question?
Nope, I think we've covered just about, the only thing is I encourage people to just experiment with their reverse pendulum. I love the feeling.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. And also, if people wanted to, um, I was gonna say, if people wanted to get help from you, Margie, you just told me that you're not seeing any new clients one on one. However, you have some online resources that people can get a sense of what you're talking about with all these joint motions and pendulums. And maybe
Well,
we can.
I have a very disorganized YouTube. So I do have playlists. It's very disorganized, but that is kind of the project that I'm working on is online content. Having too much fun this summer right now to work on projects. But
Yeah, fair enough.
right,
All right,
well,
well,
it's
thanks, Margie. Appreciate
yeah.
your time, and thanks, Sue, for writing in that excellent question.